Okay. Hello and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live event. And first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're joining. Hi, Miriam. Hi, Adrian. My name's Linda. I'm responsible for sales and business development, and I am here today with Adrian, our lead auditor. Since how many years, Adrian?
Since 10, 11 years now.
But vast experience, more than only 10 years, let's be honest.
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, it's over 15 years of experience in auditing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's clear. But lead auditor, as it
Mm-hmm.
stated, step only 11 years. Yes.
Yes. And Adrian is also our product manager for Step and Made in Green. So I want to pick his brain on those two products today, which have a close link to the Fashion Transparency Index. And also here with us today is Miriam. You have also two products under your hat. Which
Yes.
ones are those?
Yes, exactly. So it's responsible business, which we talk a bit later on a bit more, and the leather standard.
Great. So now that we have introduced ourselves, I would also be curious who we have joining us today and why. And Nicole in the backstage, very important person also, will be posting a poll in the chat. So we'd be very happy if you can give us a quick response there, why you're joining today, and that will help us to tailor it a bit better, and also future live events to make them as interesting as possible for you. So, having those matters cleared up, let's delve in. And first off, why does transparency actually matter? So, well, to put it bluntly, a lack of transparency, of course, costs lives. When the Rana Plaza building collapsed 10 years ago, very tragically, killing and injuring thousands of garment workers, rescuers had to dig through the rubble looking for clothes labels to actually figure out which brands were producing clothes there. It's impossible for companies to make sure that human rights are respected, working conditions are safe, and the environment is protected without knowing where the products are actually made. So one of the main challenges for brands and retailers is supply chains are complex, they are fragmented, and they are deregulated and, well, not very transparent. So the lack of visibility of the supply chains allows exploitative work, unsafe working conditions, and environmental damage to thrive while obscuring who has a responsibility and power to actually tackle this issue. So this makes it obvious why transparency matters. And in this LinkedIn Live event today, I would like to focus with Miriam and Adrian's help today on looking at the key results first of the Fashion Transparency Index, and then taking a step further and discussing with Adrian and Miriam how we can initiate the change with the help of OEKO-TEX certification. So this first question, why transparency matters, leads me nicely over to why the Fashion Transparency Index was actually brought to life. So the answer is obvious, I guess. That transparency is the basis of progressing on any sustainability topic in the Fashion Transparency Index. The Fashion Transparency Index was first published in 2016 in response to the Rana Plaza tragedy, as we just mentioned, and transparency is a basis for sustainable fashion, which Fashion Revolution envisages, as is stated here, where dignified work is possible, fair and equal pay, and respect for culture and heritage, where fashion conserves and restores the environment and does not waste. We look at 5 key areas. We'll delve into them in detail right after. And there are 258 indicators looked at across these 5 areas. And you might ask which brands we are looking at there. So the brands that are chosen are based on the annual turnover. It has to be over 400 million US dollars. And they have to be represented in market segments across various streets, across high street, luxury, sportswear, accessories, footwear, and denim. And then, of course, globally represented. This brings us to 250 brands. And when we move on there, let's have a look at the 5 key areas. And I just got also the message from Nicole that we have the polls in. Let me quickly pause there because that would be interest me, of course, vastly to see who we are actually speaking to. Let's have a look. I'll just have a look there. I think we only have a few votes in there. So let's. Okay. I see. I see. I haven't shared my screen yet. Bear with me. There we go. Okay, so let's move swiftly back to sort of highlight quickly what, why, and since when the Fashion Transparency Index existed. So this, just again to summarize what I spoke about, but it's always good to have it in writing, is that there are 5 key areas, 258 indicators, and the basis, as mentioned before, and it's quite obvious, sustainability topic. To move anything across the sustainability topics, the basis of everything is transparency. It has been published for the 7th time this year, since 2016. And here you have the quote of Fashion Revolution, what their goal is with this Fashion Transparency Index, with publishing it every year. They want dignified work, they want equal pay, and conserve and restore the environment, and no waste generated. Moving on to the 5 key areas. Bear with me. We have these 5 key areas. The pie chart shows the weighting and therefore also the importance each area is given. So looking first as policy and commitment, brands' social and environmental policies, both for their employees and workers in the supply chains, are looked at, and whether they set relevant targets. So this is a small proportion, around 13%. Moving on to a very small proportion, the weighting it's given is governance. So who on the executive board has a responsibility for social and environmental performance, how it is implemented, and especially how the link is made for the social and environmental improvements to employees, to the CEO, and then also, most importantly, to the supplier performance. Then we have, no surprise, one of the most important parts, most important key areas, which is traceability. And the traceability, we'll look at that both with Adrian and Miriam afterwards, because this is such an important part of the study. It looks at whether the brands publish their supplier lists on 3 levels: on manufacturing, on processing facilities, and mills and raw materials. And there, the emphasis is that the list is updated and it's publicly available. Another key area which is given around 17% of the weighting. So you see, it's also rather important, and I find this one especially important to drive the change, because No Show and Fix, this area is called, looks at the human rights and environmental due diligence processes and how the suppliers' policies are implementing the results of audits and assessment, where the problems are found and how they are addressed. So here we actually we can see whether the brand takes accountability for the problems they find in the part of their supply chains. And finally, we have the spotlight issues. This is, you can see on the left-hand side, it's a vast area of different topics. I will call the one focus is on the social aspect, so decent work, gender and racial equality, and then we have the environmental part on overconsumption, water and chemicals, so wastewater management goes in there as well, and climate change and biodiversity. This one is weighted the highest with 36%, and it has gone up since the initiation from 19% roughly to 36%, so 6%. So you really see how much more importance the fashion revolution has put on this area, and it's because we want to push harder on the disclosure of the most urgent and difficult problems the industry is facing. And this part, I'm also happy that we have Adrian here on board, because this is a part we look at in step. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because we have to get the groundwork covered. So what is the Fashion Transparency Index and what is it not? Because the Fashion Transparency Index does cover a lot, but we also have to see what it does not do and where we can also build on the Fashion Transparency Index. So what it definitely is, it publishes, it looks at what brands publish in terms of human rights and environmental impact across their value chain. So not only their supply chain, but their whole value chain. And it awards points according to what is publicly disclosed in terms of information and data. What it is not is that it does not measure impacts, ethics, and sustainability practices. And it therefore also doesn't verify claims made by brands and retailers. So it's, as we mentioned before, transparency is a basis for initiating progress and change in the fashion industry, but it does not mean that we have to stop there. It's simply a start. Having the groundwork covered, let's look at some highlights, because it's not all bleak. There are some good points to be had there. So one good point there is that due to the due diligence legislations on the horizon we have there in the EU, but also we see in the US, there are legislations on the horizon, and there are also some implemented, speaking of Germany or also France since 2017. Fashion brands have increased their disclosure levels on their social and environmental due diligence. And it's also nice to see that 2 brands have scored higher than 80% for the first time this year. And 5 of the biggest movers, so the biggest increase was seen by luxury brands, and one of the brands that scored higher than 80% was indeed a luxury brand. And one nice progress, even though it could be better, I must say, is that more than half of the major fashion brands finally disclosed their tier 1 suppliers, so their direct suppliers. Having looked at the positive side, we also have to have the full picture and look at the things that have room for improvement. And there we have some lowlights, I must say. So of the fashion brands that received the survey and were asked to participate, only 61% completed the questionnaire. This is down from 62% last year. Even though that's only a minimal drop, it's still shocking to see that we can progress there. So that we hope can change in the next year. And then one really sad one is that 1% of the major fashion brands only disclose is the number of workers being paid a living wage in their supply chain. And 15% of the brands disclose the number or the percentage of the facilities that have independent, democratically elected trade unions. This is important, of course, to give the suppliers a voice that they can say if something is wrong and again initiate the change. Despite studies showing that hazardous chemicals can still be found in clothes, well, there's always a small percentage which will be found in clothes because clothes are produced using chemicals, of course, but there we're looking at the wastewater part, and it's shocking to see that only 7% of the major fashion brands actually publish their wastewater test results or the test results of their suppliers. Overall, how does... moved ahead. So overall, how do the average scores across all of the 5 sections look like? Here, if we look first at the positive side. So on the policies and commitment, we see more than half of the brands questioned seem to have a good score there. However, if we compare it to the no-show fix part, and now that we know what the 5 key areas cover, it's actually something where we have to see how can we close the gap. Because on the one hand side, we see with the policies and commitments that more and more brands commit to certain sustainability targets and improvements, but it seems like a lower percentage actually shows how they want to progress and how they want to address the problem. So having that part covered on a bit of a negative side, let's see how we can be a catalyst for change. So we'd like to spin the wheel a bit more to a positive side. So we're starting with transparency. Now we have looked closer to the actual problems. We want to give the brands ownership, but how can we do that? How can we initiate the change? And there we see the opportunity with OEKO-TEX, the OEKO-TEX portfolio, because it actually gives a good basis to, across the supply chain on different levels, to initiate change, and every step of the supply chain to take ownership for their part. So here we look at the input, we look at the chemicals coming into the supply chain, then we have the how, the process with STEP, how things are produced in a socially and environmentally responsible way. And on the output side, the products, are they safe and responsibly produced, and are they safe from harmful substances with standard 100? And on top of all, we have the due diligence, and there it's about, do we have transparency of the supply chain? Is the brand taking accountability of its supply chain? And when it discovers problems, does it want to initiate the change? And if we look at where we could place the 5 key areas that are important in the Fashion Transparency Index, one of the most important part on traceability, we would assign to both responsible business, so to product of Miriam, and we'll go into that in more detail right now. And then we also have Made in Green, our label, which is a traceable label. So traceable label traceability fits nicely in together, of course, there. And then we have the other part, no show fix, governance, policies and commitments. These all go hand in hand, or where responsible business can build on these points. So with that covered, I would like to move on to the most important product, as you saw on the top with all of the areas covered in there, Miriam. What is RB and how does it address the due diligence of brands and retailers?
Yes, so OEKO-TEX Responsible Business, or also known as RB, is actually a management tool to meet due diligence requirements in the textile and leather industry. Um, it certifies the management system of a company with a step-by-step approach, integrating human rights and environmental criteria into their management processes, allowing them to fulfill their due diligence obligations along the supply chain, and identifies risks at an early stage already. Um, yeah, the product is based on 7 modules, 6 required ones and one optional module to be in line with the EU proposal, which is really nice highlighted here in this circle. Yeah.
Great. I think it really nicely addresses all of the key areas. Let's give them a show here as well. So we have the governance, as you mentioned, traceability, no show fix. In terms of governance, do we check who in the company is accountable for social and environmental performance and impact?
Yes, absolutely. So clear roles and responsibility must be defined. A responsible business policy and management system, a supplier code of conduct, and a grievance mechanism must be embedded into the business and communicated with a pass-on clause to the deeper supply chain. So we verified that the top management and business enterprise has a commitment to take responsibility for direct and indirect impacts of the business enterprise on human rights, the environment, and other risks in the supply chain.
Great. So it's not only at face value, so we really go deeper into the supply chain with the pass-on clause as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And when we look at the area of no-show fix, do we also verify that brands and retailers work to identify and address human rights and environmental risks, impacts, and violations in the supply chain?
Yeah, this is actually a core part in the modules 2 to 4. So first of all, the business enterprise has to identify and prioritize potential and actual risks of its own operations and its supply chain in the risk assessment. So that's module 2. And then in module 3, integration of appropriate actions, they have to define and implement smart measures to avoid and mitigate risks in the supply chain. And on top, in module 4, the continuous monitoring, they really have to review the set measures on a regular basis. I would also say a crucial and very strict regulated part is the last mandatory module complaint mechanism, in which the company must ensure a public available access to remedy for the company and the whole supply chain. Additionally, the handling and management of complaints is very important too, as personal data protection plays a sensitive role here.
Great. And it seems like it's very comprehensive. Do we support them there? Do they have any supporting documents if they don't have smart measures, if they don't have a supplier code of conduct yet?
Yes, absolutely. So once they applied for the certification or just a self-assessment process, they receive supporting documents from our side. For example, if they don't know how to set up a risk analysis, we provide them with a template. They also get a manual for the standard, so they really have like a guideline or a guidance how to do or implement due diligence in their business, into their business.
Smashing. So
Yeah.
that means, I mean, it's very, very detailed, very extensive, but that's what we need to actually be a catalyst for change. But we give them a helping hand, and they're not left alone.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, great. And when we move on to a more detailed look at RB, what do we see here? I would like to look at the aspect of transparency in more detail, as it is a key area for the name of the fashion, and also in the name of the Fashion Transparency Index. And the Fashion Transparency Index focuses on whether brands are publishing their supplier list from manufacturing facilities to raw material level, and what level of details brands are disclosing about these suppliers. So this is a part of traceability. Do we do the same, or do we go even further when I look at this list?
Yeah, so what you see here on the slide is actually an example of the certification evaluation. So the evaluation results are demonstrated per module individually and therefore highlight the company status quo or respectively individual progress regarding due diligence. Um, in terms of transparency, this is the first step towards showing how deeply the company has integrated due diligence into its supply chain and integrates appropriate actions and communicates transparently. Um, the companies might don't disclose their suppliers by name publicly, but they clearly have to disclose all direct and indirect suppliers during the certification process to us as a third party certification. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to verify it actually. Um, yeah, nevertheless, in terms of due diligence, they have to report transparently on the identified risks, corresponding actions, continuous monitoring, and complaints down to achieved supply chain level, which does reveal many details about the supply chain already. So I would say, or I personally think it's more important to have a verified implementation of due diligence in a company's supply chain rather than just disclosing the name. So I would say we go even further.
Yes, totally agree. And when I look only at already at this example, and thank you very much for explaining it in detail, because when you look at it first, it is a bit overwhelming.
Yes.
But again, I feel the helping hand is there.
Yeah.
So having looked at our, so the top part, like when you have a house, we are now covered from the rain or the sun. In Switzerland, it's quite warm at the moment. We go further down. So we go into the process and we want to look at how the product is actually made. Is it respecting human rights and looking at the environmental impact? And there, of course, I couldn't ask any better person here in terms of expertise than Adrian. How we can there tackle the spotlight issues with STEP. But first, I mean, I would like to ask, when I look at this slide with, I think it's 6 modules, it looks like a very comprehensive certification, Adrian.
Yes, it is. Yeah. It is a very comprehensive standard because it includes all matters and it's the most comprehensive in the world anyway. But today we actually wanted to focus on the 2 models which are important to meet this transparency index. Talking about environmental performance, which is the main part regarding what I mentioned before, water use, energy use, wastewater, etc. And of course, we have the other model, which is social responsibility. And yes, you already mentioned in this 5 spots highlights where we look at, it's very important that we have covered in it. And maybe you go to the next slide.
Sure. May I just ask here,
Yeah, please.
if it's so comprehensive and so detailed, it must be difficult to achieve. Do we have many facilities that are already certified?
I like your question because we have been very proudly increased a very high number this year because we running this standard for step certifications for 10 years now, this year. And in the beginning, it was very hard to really get it going. And then we sort of like increased dramatically before the COVID pandemic, and then it sort of like stabilized. But now we really have a very high increase again of step certification because lots of brands ask their suppliers to get step certified. So that's why we have increased until now up to 1,100 step facilities being certified, and this in over 55 countries worldwide. So this is just to give you a figure where we're going and how it's increasing. And I can see my other colleagues from other institutes, it's dramatically increasing at the moment. Luckily, of course.
Yes, luck, and yeah, happily, of course, because having looked at all the highlights and lowlights, the highlights weren't so high and the lowlights were quite low in the Fashion Transparency Index. It's nice to see actual change in the industry with such a level of detail. So it's not just a superficial certification, I would say.
Yes, it is. Yeah, definitely, because it's independent and it's a very nice tool. Everything is done online. You don't have to fill out papers, stuff like that. It makes it very easy to use. That's one of our advantages of step certification.
So if we move further, as you say, in the two areas or in the two modules, we call them, that specifically address the spotlight issues, which is what the main area that covers 36 is given a 36% weighting in the Fashion Transparency Index.
Mm. Yeah, that's why I showing with this slide actually what sort of like giving you an idea what sequences we actually cover in this step certification model, social responsibility. And very important is for lots of brands or even suppliers, they have some social policy or social responsibility certification already, and they are recognized by our system. So they don't have to do it double again. No double auditing fatigue is not really taking place here. And but we're focusing more on the compliance with legal requirements. And this is very important since it has to be in every country in a different law, and the suppliers have to comply with the law. And of course, social acceptable working conditions, as we know from ILO conventions and UN regulations, they have to be fulfilled. So this is exclusion criteria included in our social model here to be part to actually fulfill this. And we're checking this very intensely during our audits. And last but not least, fair wages, living wage, minimum wage to be paid is one of the very important matters here too, besides the others listed up here, like the grievance mechanism system, for instance. So all this is part of the social responsibility model where we focus on in our step certification.
Great. So we see it here on the slide, the main areas, and you highlighted the most important aspects. I think also, especially the audit fatigue there is important. We try to collaborate where possible and not have that the suppliers don't have to have double work where it's not necessary. And also drawing the link again to the spotlight issues. The spotlight issues on the social part are decent work covering forced labor, living wages, purchasing practices, unionization, collective bargaining, and gender and equality. And I believe these are all covered in STEP.
Yes, correct. They are all covered in the one which is you just pointed out about the island conventions. They're covered in there with questions and verifications during the audit.
Great. So we have the social aspect covered. of the spotlight issues. I would say let's move on to the environmental performance part. Oh,
One more back here. Here we are.
here we are.
Great. That's the one. Yeah. We also have here environmental performance, a lot of parts covered. Of course, everything you can think of. As I mentioned before, energy resources and water resources used, handling and storage of chemicals. But here, like in wastewater, as you mentioned before already, on a small amount of suppliers actually
Yeah.
disclose their wastewater reports. As we here realize that all step companies have to supply a wastewater report, mainly done with the big testing institutes we know worldwide. Not to name anybody here, but all of them know about the wastewater testing according to ZDHC or STEP, and also including here air emission and sludge, which is also part of it. But not to forget, what is also very important is the carbon water footprint. And for that purpose, we have launched last year the STEP impact calculator to have a tool for our STEP facilities, a tool to evaluate and measure and get some figures out of the company regarding carbon and water footprint. And last but not least, to point out here is one other part besides the packaging and use of VAT is the waste management. I mean, companies need to know what kind of waste they have, if they reuse it or recycle it, where it is going to, how it is treated afterwards, and also the most focus is to use or to generate less waste every year by year. So this is just to give you an idea what it all covers.
Yeah, it's a really comprehensive area, and I believe it also has grown in importance for us in the last 3 years, maybe, with the impact calculator now already, with the carbon and water footprint. I think that's a really good tool, especially because it focuses on the industry we are working in, so the textile and leather industry, that it's not just any facility. So we built it for the industry we are certifying the facilities in.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah. So great to see that, because I wrote one part out that 24% of the surveyed brands at present only publish the water footprint of their manufacturing facilities, and 64% of the carbon footprint of their own facilities. So if anyone doesn't know how to do it, we have the tool here. I think that one would be to test. And as you see, maybe you already have, if you're a brand joining us today, maybe you have already a supplier that has a STEP certification, and you can make use of the impact calculator and the report that is part of the environmental performance here. Having covered, so we have the roof with responsible business. We've gone deep with STEP, because it's a very comprehensive certification of how something is produced, social and environmental, social responsibility, environmental performance we covered today. And these are only 2 of the 6 modules. And now I would like to take a step back and look at when I go into a shop as a consumer and I want to purchase a sustainable product. What do I look at, and how could I make a responsible choice? So there again, Adrian was made in green. What are we looking at, and how does it stand in relation to STEP?
Well, Made in Green is actually the top product of OEKO-TEX Association, since it is including both. It includes, as you mentioned before, the standard 100 as being, or the leather standard as being one of the product certifications to make sure there's no harmful substances on the product. But also now, as we just referred to STEP, so the facilities have to be STEP certified. meaning we are making very sure that the supply chain is producing sustainably and the product is also tested. And this leads up to the made in green. And this is pointed out here in this hang tag, which we come to the next slide, what it covers. So it covers actually everything as we mentioned before, and is in one product label. There's no certification like a made in green, but that's a product label only. And the company can use it to show how far they go and how sustainably they produce and how much they take care of it. And thank you for going for the next slide. Here it is actually very comprehensively disclosive to 4 very important points. Made in environmentally friendly facilities, product and consumer safety ensured through testing for harmful substances, made in socially responsible and safe workplaces, as well as transparency ensured through supply chain traceability. Now, meaning this made in green dashboard tool for our OEKO-TEX partners has the possibility to place all the suppliers in this tool, which we call My OEKO-TEX or the Made in Green dashboard. And we can then, with this tool using it, produce a Made in Green label. And when you scan the label on the QR code or on the product code, you get information on the suppliers, who are the suppliers, who is in the supply chain, and where. And yeah, here we go. Thank you very much for increasing that a bit. So we have the possibility for all our attendees today. Take your smartphone out of your pocket and scan this QR code, which is visible here on our screen. And when you do that, you get to the website of OEKO-TEX Association, and you will see the product which is also placed in the slide here about this Kalida pyjama. So I guess all of the attendees today have reached that level that you can see all the parts in it. And as you see on here on the slide, it's shown here, you see the supply chain. You see the brand, where it's situated in Switzerland, and its supply chain on this map here in Europe. So this gives you immediately, not you as a brand only, but also for all the consumers and consumers, gives you a picture, where is my textile produced and how safe it is produced. And I'm on the safe side because I know where it is produced and it is sustainably produced. So I have a good feeling as an end consumer. That's what we always hear from people buying it, that they know about where and how it is produced.
Yeah, that's really great. So I think this one, I want to pause here because Nicole in the background again, thank you very much, posted the link. If you're joining with a smartphone, you can also click on the label check URL and then enter the label number into the label check here, and then you will end up at the same supply chain and product information. Or as Adrian just said, you can scan the QR code. So there are 2 different ways on which you can reach this information. And here we have everything coming together. I think what we discussed before, we have the part on transparency. Yes, we see the supply chain. And we started off with transparency as a basis of progressing towards a sustainable future for the fashion industry. So this basis is covered, but we really go deep there in terms of that the whole product is tested for harmful substances with standard 100, key requirement. But also we look at the social and environmental performance of the facilities that it's produced in. And there Adrian already mentioned the key aspects of environmental performance and social responsibility. So that really gives the consumer peace of mind and is a key tool, we believe, also to initiate change and be a catalyst, and having as a brand also the transparency which suppliers to trust in for a sustainable future. Great. So having covered all, so we looked at some of the key areas of the Fashion Transparency Index, and then we went on to look at how we can actually be a catalyst for change in the industry with certifications. We took the example of responsible business with the roof. We went deep with STEP. We went then into the shop with the consumer. How can they make a responsible purchasing choice? And now I would like to end with where we stand today. So again, some images from the Fashion Transparency Index. And here the title is basically, well, mind the gap, because there is some progress in terms of publishing the tier 1 suppliers. But if we look at this graph here, it's very small, so bear with me, I'll explain it in the level of detail that's important here. So we have 48% of the brands publish tier 1 suppliers without naming the facility. And if we go down the line with naming the facility, it goes down to 4, selected with audit finding. It goes up a bit because these seem to be responsible brands, and then full audit report with named facilities, there we're getting down to 2. And if we look at the raw material suppliers, even not naming the name of the facility, we only have 6 brands that name their raw material suppliers. So drawing the line again back to responsible business, here we still have work to do, I believe. And if we see mind the gap, so there is a positive intention definitely there, but we want not only a positive intention to actually look at where the problem lies, we need clear accountability to initiate the change. And there we have a gaping hole, a big gap between what brands are saying and, well, what they're actually doing. Because taking the example on the environmental impact, 72% of the brands surveyed publish measurable, time-bound, and long-term targets towards improving environmental impact. Great. This stands in stark contrast to only 61% disclosing their progress towards achieving them. And on human rights, we have a similar picture where 74% publish the targets to improve their practices, but on the other hand side, only 40% disclose the progress towards reaching these goals. And this is what we want to be a helping hand to improve in closing the gap between what is said and what is done, in terms of maybe it's already some things are done, but how the actually publish and work on their progress, because you don't always have to be there. It's about working on the progress and sharing that with the public. So to summarize again, the main advantages of the OEKO-TEX system, to wrap it up here, the OEKO-TEX certifications, all of them we just saw there, and also our label made in green, these we make sure that they can comply with future regulations in the textile and leather industry, so they are updated on a yearly basis. And as you just saw, it's important to communicate the progress. So the certifications and also the label, when you scan it and the customer can see it, it's a great tool for corporate communication and actually publishing what you're doing. We also have standardized audit results. I think there, Adrian, you are the master of disaster. You make sure that all of our auditors receive the same training when it comes to STEP.
Correct, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then we also look at collaboration. Adrian mentioned before that we don't run into audit fatigue, and we make sure that we are relevant for the market, and we are in collaboration with the relevant standards, initiatives, and certification. So we don't just create a certification to be another one on the market. And what Miriam mentioned also before, which is important, we lend a helping hand. So our experts are here to help you understand the due diligence requirements so you can implement an effective management system. On our free products we just highlighted, I would like to hand it over back to Miriam and Adrian again. Miriam, what is the main advantage you would highlight for responsible business then here?
Yeah, I would say responsible business is independent. It's an independent certification system with a high level of credibility and trust to provide companies with a step-by-step approach or a helping hand on the way to due diligence in all levels of the supply chain. I would say it complements the other OEKO-TEX products perfectly.
Great. And in terms of when we go deep, Adrian with STEP, and then for the consumers?
Yeah, talking about STEP, I mean, especially for the brands, it is important for them to know if the suppliers are in line with the recommendation, with the requirements which you just mentioned before, and that is one of the things which is covered by STEP certification and allows the consumers or even the customers to trust in the product when it is produced in a sustainably certified facility.
Great.
And last but not least, made in green, as we had this example before, it is the transparent label which is showing you the traceability of the product, and it shows very transparently where it is produced, in which company, in which country, so the end consumer has something to rely on.
Great summary. Thank you very much to both of you. And that brings us to the end. Are there any questions from the ones joining us live? I will also skip back quickly if we have the polls, which if they are completed, let me check. We can share some here. And otherwise, you always have the possibility afterwards to reach out to me. I added my personal details here, and then I will, of course, pass it on to the relevant expert to make sure we can address your question. And looking at the votes, we have, general interest in the Fashion Transparency Index. It's a really interesting report there. I think it's over 150 pages long, so it's a really extensive report, but it was really interesting reading it. And then also in terms of sometimes it's difficult to wade through all of the details and the numbers and results and see what is relevant for me as a brand and what is relevant for me as a supplier and where should I actually focus on, because sustainability is such a big topic. So with that said, I would say, shall we close it for today? Oh, we have one question I just see. Thank you very much, Nicole. When will the first test system be available in Bangladesh? Well, we have OEKO-TEX in Bangladesh. You can also do a STEP certification for your facility if it's that you would like to focus on. It really depends on what type of certification, but it's not limited to one country.
Yeah, it's not limited to any country because you can the STEP certification or made in green labels used in, or even responsible business for every country you can think of. And in Bangladesh, there's quite a high number of certifications already, STEP certifications in Bangladesh. done in the past 10 years.
Yeah, and it's great to see that we have an increase there because it's one of the main manufacturing countries when it comes to textiles, of course.
Especially in the making up section.
Yes, yeah. Great. Thank you very much, Nico, to the backstage for pointing that out.
If anybody was attending wants to know where are the or how which companies already step certified, you find this in our OEKO-TEX buying guide. And there you can give in step certification, give in the country, and you get the list of all companies being certified so far.
Good point, Adrian. Let's post that into the chat. Let's see if I can find it right away. And then I will let Nico add that to the chat as well, that everyone can browse there because it's a really powerful tool. I would say it's a free tool where you can then check which of the suppliers are already certified, especially when you're a brand that you don't have to start from scratch. Oh, thank you very much, Nicole. So you have it in the chat there, and have a wee browse through it. You can filter according to the country, on the type of facility, on the type of product. So maybe it's only standard 100 you want to start with, which is absolutely fine. Maybe you want to go into depth with step, or you want the finished product, which would be then made in green. Great. In that case, I would call this a wrap. Thank you very much, Miriam and Adrian, for your expertise. It was, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for having us. Yeah. Thanks for attending anyway, all the people that attended today.
And we look forward to doing this in future again. And we really appreciate your feedback to making these LinkedIn Live events as relevant as possible for you. So for now, goodbye and have a nice day or evening from wherever you've been joining.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.